as parents, we risk too little, we rescue too quickly, and we rave too easily. All of those are well-intentioned moves on our part as moms and dads. We risk too little because we fear for their safety. The world is a scary place. We rescue too quickly because we fear for their status, as I mentioned earlier. What if they don't make the good grade? They can't get the scholarship. They can't get into the college of choice. And so we just experienced that biggest college admission scandal ever last year.
Yeah.
But then we rave too easily. We have become a generation of parents that are full of hyperbole. I think the word awesome may be overused just a little bit too much.
The Workplace Therapist Show is brought to you by The Worksmiths, a leadership development firm specializing in executive coaching, team retreats, and leadership education. Contact The Worksmiths for all of your leadership development needs. This is the Workplace Therapist Show, and of course, I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And today we are going to talk about not the millennial generation necessarily. We're going to talk about Gen Z, and a up-and-coming generation that sometimes maybe doesn't get as much as attention as it should. And so to help us on this journey, I am so excited and pleased to have our guest expert, Dr. Tim Elmore, CEO and founder of Growing Leaders. Tim, so glad to have you on the show.
Thanks, Brandon. Great to be with you.
Yeah, so this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I have 3 Gen Zers living in my house. So
Yes.
I definitely know what it's like to live with them, but would love to get some perspectives on what you see doing kind of research on that generation, what you see is maybe different from that generation, the millennial generation, which is also an area of expertise for you. But before we jump into all that fun stuff, tell my listeners a little bit about you. Kind of what kind of led you into this space, and what's been kind of your journey?
Okay, good. Well, thanks for asking. I actually began teaching students, that would be high school and college students, in the 1980s. I actually started in 1979, so I'm past 40 years now, believe it or not,
Wow.
and still love the emerging generation, whoever they happen to be. But 4 years into my career, I began working with Dr. John Maxwell. And some of your listeners might know John's name. John is a New York Times best-selling author in leadership. He did the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership and about 60 other books. So I was with John, and my love of the younger generation began to be married to my love of leadership. And I decided I didn't want to just teach students and help them graduate. I wanted to build leaders out of the emerging generation. So I wanted to make sure that they didn't get to 40 years old and made 4 big mistakes, ruined a company and ruined a marriage. I wanted them to flourish at 22 years old right out of college. So Growing Leaders is really about that. We're about developing the emerging generations with skills to lead in real life, career readiness. And we also do a lot of parenting events. You alluded to the fact that you've got 3 Gen Z kids. So I was just in LA doing a large parenting event out there, even though I don't claim to be a parenting expert, but there's nobody with more at stake than moms and dads when it comes to the emerging generation. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know you've done so much research on the millennial generation, so maybe a good starting place, and people are very familiar with that generation. It's such a dominant generation in the world. So tell us a little bit about what makes Gen Z maybe different. So maybe that's a good starting place for this.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest mistake we often make as employers, parents, coaches, teachers, is to think that Gen Z is just a continuation of the millennials, and they are not. There are at least 9 big shifts that I think Gen Z has made unwittingly, perhaps, as the youngest generation. So anticipation about life has morphed into anxiety. They experience more mental health issues than any generation on record. Dr. Robert Leahy, a cognitive behavioral therapist, said not too long ago, the average American teenager experiences the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient did in the 1950s. It's just
that's
crazy.
Scary.
Yeah, so depression, anxiety, panic attacks, not everywhere, but a growing number.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's a number of reasons. It's a perfect storm of several, not the least of which is social media. I think we all got ambushed by what social media would do to our brains. And so I'm not anti-social media. We're on social media platforms. But here's the latest data, just to give you one quick overview. Dr. Jean Twenge, a friend who's at San Diego State University, has overseen a study called Monitoring the Future. Mm-hmm. And she tells us when a young person spends less than 2 hours a day on social media, they're less vulnerable to anxiety and depression. The moment you go over 2 hours, you become increasingly vulnerable to anxiety and depression.
Wow.
So again, it's not solo, but it's enough to make me say as a parent, hey, guys, just, limit it, moderation.
Yeah.
I love this line, Brandon. This is my favorite line of the year so far. When our phones had leashes, we were free. Now our phones are free and we have leashes.
That's really good.
Yeah. So anyway, again, there's a number of reasons that have led to the anxiety and depression. Some people look at kids today and go, oh my gosh, they've never had it better. But on the other hand, while that's true, I think there are many cases of mentally and emotionally that they've never had it worse and never had more pressure to make the grade, make the team, make the cut, make the money. And so this growing anxiety exists.
Wow.
So I'll stop there, but that's just one looming shift that the millennials don't even understand sometimes. And I think employers and parents need to really get.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a really, really critical one, and naturally social media is a contributing factor to that. But I think also I know in my house, it's about trying to put things in perspective as best we can.
Yes,
we're
no doubt about it.
And my daughter, Abby, well, she interned with Growing Leaders this past summer, and she's in the process now of going through selecting colleges. And as much as, we try and say to her, at the end of the day, it's going to all work out great. It doesn't really matter.
Yes.
It's so easy for her to attach her identity to who says yes and who says no. And that, creates waves of fun in my house, Tim. Fun.
I'm sure it does. Well, and you've got great kids, Brand. Abby's a quality young lady. But think about the average young person today. Just think about how different their world is than the one perhaps that I grew up in. So their generation started with the .com era bubble bursting. Was September 11th, 2001. They were infants or whatever, or young people, but huge terrorism threats. It feels to them like somebody's getting blown up somewhere in the world every day. It feels like there's been some mass shooting or school shooting every day. And by the way, last year that was actually true. In 2019, there were 365 days in that year, like all years, there were 419 mass shootings in the US. Wow. So combine that with just the overwhelming amount of messages they're getting, 10,000 a day, when you consider conversations, emails, social media posts, advertising, television, Netflix, all of that come together. I think it's an overwhelming sense of, I don't know if I can keep up. And again, as an employer, we just need to go, you can do this. In fact, I think with the millennials, you had to say, now hold on, you may not be vice president by the time you're 24 years old. With Gen Z, you might need to say, you can do this. I really believe it's in you to do this. So I'll stop there.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and so I know you mentioned there's 9 differences with this generation or particular elements around this generation. And I want to give a plug. We'll talk more about it later, but your newest book, Generation Z Unfiltered, has got all those. And so we don't have time, nor would we want to go through all those today. You mentioned anxiety is one. What's maybe another differentiation between Gen Z and, say, millennials, or just a particular aspect of this generation that'd be really important for us to know?
Well, this is a soundbite that might be helpful to your listeners. One of the chapters in the book, we just try to nail who are they as a demographic. What do the numbers tell us? And what do the focus groups tell us? We've got both quantitative and qualitative data. The 7 characteristics I'm going to give you real quick. Spell the word partner, Partner. So Gen Z is more private than the millennials. In fact, they probably learned to be private from the millennials who shared way too much and found out there were social media predators and stalkers and so forth. So they're much more private. They're much more anxious. I mentioned that already. They're much more restless. So if you've got a young employee or you've got a young person in your home, it's very likely they'll have a hard time sitting still. More from Generation Z have been diagnosed with ADHD than any generation on record. Their attention spans are 8 seconds, not 12 seconds like the millennials. So just think you've got a restless generation. The letter T is tech friendly or tech savvy. You already know this, listeners. They're at home in the world of technology. One university student recently said to me, "My phone is an appendage to my body." And that's kind of how they look at it. The letter N, they're more nurtured. So because parents are so scared for their safety and their self-esteem and their status at school and getting into the college, we have nurtured them. Now, not all kids are nurtured. There's some kids at risk environments, but the middle-class American home nurtured their children. We yanked the monkey bars off the playground and put knee pads and elbow pads and helmets on them at dinner time. I'm totally kidding. But
That's a
it
really
does feel
good
that way,
image.
doesn't it? It's like, oh my gosh.
Amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and in some ways, while that's explainable, it often makes them very unready for a career when it's time to, work full time and their boss isn't going to nurture them like mama did, that sort of thing. The letter E, this is cool. They're more entrepreneurial than past generations. 72% of public high school students, that would be like Abby, wants to be an entrepreneur. They want to start something. They want to start an app or a platform or whatever and be YouTube famous or whatever. But I love that entrepreneurial spirit. That's the American spirit in my mind.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the letter R in partner, we have found the data shows us they're far more redemptive, which means they don't want to just go to work and make widgets and generate revenue. They want to change the world. They want to move the needle. They want to make a difference. All those cliches. In fact, they would have a difficult time. Well, let me say it to you this way, Brandon. Given the choice between two job opportunities, all things being equal, they'll go with a job that they see the company really does something for the community, or that their job itself really makes the world a better place. So I think employers need to sell that when they're hiring. This job will actually make this world better. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the skinny on Gen Z.
Beautiful setup. So we're going to roll into break. When we come back from break, I want to take this topic down two paths. As employers, what can we be doing to really set them up for success?
Yeah,
almost all my listeners are going to be thinking about hiring and kind of grooming these folks in their offices or workplaces. And then as parents, what can we be doing to getting them ready to hand them off to our employers?
Good.
So I think those are two good paths. And my listeners are probably going to be sitting in both those seats right now. So I think that's a great place for us to go right after break. Hey, this is Brandon with your coaching minute for the week. So I've got a tip for you that I put on most of my clients' action plans that you may think it sounds a little crazy. So hear me out. I want you to designate one of your colleagues or coworkers, somebody maybe works in a different department that maybe a peer of yours that you don't work with every day. And I want you to intentionally plan on having lunch with one colleague or coworker a month. So all I'm asking for is one lunch a month. And you may say to yourself, Brandon, that's such a waste of time. I don't have time to have lunch with people. But what I have found for my clients that's been able to do this is they come back and they say, not only was it so valuable to learn more about them as a person, I learned really important stuff going on in their departments. And they learned important stuff going on in mine. And we were able to share information, and we both agreed it was a really good use of our time. So that's my challenge to you. Designate a day of the month that you're willing to go out to lunch with a coworker. Go find one. Go out to lunch, and I promise you, you're going to be glad you did. It's going to help you be more productive, operate more efficiently and effectively, and strengthen some of those relationships that we all need. So that is your coaching minute for the week. Until next week, I can't wait to hear how it goes. Welcome back from break. Of course, this is the Workplace Therapist Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And today, we've had Dr. Tim Elmore kind of enlightening us on Gen Z. And so, Tim, right before break, I was talking about these two paths I want to go down, and I don't know which order to go in. I was thinking maybe we'd start with employer, but do you think it'd be better to start with employer or parent?
Wow. Either way, but maybe we ought to start with parent, because if they're listening out of both ears, a parent and an employer, we might want to start at the home and then move outward.
I think that's a good idea. So as parents, and we're raising these Gen Zs, what are some things that we should be thinking about that would make that experience more impactful and really setting up those kids for success?
Okay, so I'm going to have two big ideas here, and I'll try to do it really rapidly here. So I did a book a few years ago called 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid. I just saw a pattern. My wife and I fell into this trap until we made some adjustments. But here's the three big ideas that I share in the final chapter of that book. As parents, we risk too little, we rescue too quickly, and we rave too easily. All of those are well-intentioned moves on our part as moms and dads. We risk too little because we fear for their safety. You know, the world is a scary place. We rescue too quickly because we fear for their status, as I mentioned earlier. What if they don't make the good grade? They can't get the scholarship. They can't get into the college of choice. And so we just experienced that biggest college admission scandal ever last year. But then we rave too easily. We have become a generation of parents that are full of hyperbole. I think the word awesome may be overused just a little bit too much. We tell them they're awesome for putting the fork in the dishwasher. And so I really try to advise just some common sense wisdom for parents. But those three have come back to haunt these kids. So while the parent may feel good about keeping them safe and et cetera, the child turns 18 or 22, gets finished with school, and they just have never had a job, or they've never really had the life experience that my generation had. I was working jobs since age 12.
Yeah.
Throwing newspapers on a driveway as a paper boy, or working fast food restaurants. So I would just encourage moms and dads listening to give them real life experience. Have them do something scary. Have them interview people that are significant. Have them do something that is bigger than they are, but love them through the process, and just know that it's better for them to take risks now in the loving environment of your home than to do it for the first time at 35 with an employer that's not so loving. So I'll stop there. I could go on for hours, but I really feel like that's the home base stuff that we need to do. And so my action steps are: have them do something scary, take them on a trip, take them overseas, that stuff like that. Have them interview someone significant, have them chase a big goal. Those kinds of things are really what I think helps mature Gen Z and maybe get them off a screen and into the real world.
Yeah. And what I like about all those activities, none of them involved a screen. You're talking to a person, you're experiencing another culture, you're out there trying something, you're trying to make the team or whatever it is, trying to build a business, whatever happens to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I love that. Now, I think there's a nice segue into the employer side of this. I'm going to do a horrible job of this. I recall years ago, I sat in on a talk you gave, and many things stuck out with me, but this one line stuck out with me. You had interviewed kind of deans and college presidents around the country, and they had come back to you and basically said, 26 is the new 18.
Yes.
And it kind of indicated this 8-year maturity gap. And so when we think about jobs, I remember getting my first job really I got it before I was legally allowed to work. But then, I was working at 15, and it seems like a lot of kids today are getting their first job closer to 23, which again goes back to this 8-year gap. There's this 8-year thing seems to keep popping up in lots of places. Yep. So what's the role of having a job in high school? I saw another interesting statistic. I saw that in the 1990s, 70% of all high schoolers had some kind of a part-time job at some point in their high school career. Bagging groceries, whatever happened to be. And then now it's dropped to 35%.
Yeah.
So is there a role of having a job in high school? Does that matter? What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. You can look at any numbers that are accurate and big, and you see we are a generation of parents that have either encouraged them not to do the job, but instead focus just on school. And that's understandable. We want them to make the good grades so they can get into the college they want to get into. But while I love education, it's a facsimile of the real world. A classroom is not a boardroom or a workroom. We all know that. So I can be a kid today, a teenager, let's say, and master, taking a test, the standardized test, et cetera. But boy, that's nothing like. It's artificial. It's virtual.
Amen, so brother. I'm so glad I brought you on this show today. You just, my wife said they're nodding her head. Yes. Yeah. So, and I always hesitate to say that because I love teachers and I love schools, but we have just been so mono-focused on really teaching them to hack school.
Here's how to take a test really well. But then when they got to get into the workforce, oh my gosh, they're still needing mom. So quick story. You may have heard me tell this story, Brandon, but there's a prof at the University of Syracuse, one of the schools we work with. She sent me an email and she said, Tim, I knew you would enjoy this little encounter I just had. She said, I teach a group of first-year students here at Syracuse. I just handed back the first set of tests to my students, and one of the girls in the class got a C minus. Well, she had never gotten a C minus in her life up to that point. So she had a meltdown right there in class. Oh, meltdown. Well, everybody looks over this poor girl. She's making noises and almost and weeping. Well, the first thing this young girl, female student, thinks to do is to pull out her cell phone out of her backpack. And she calls mom. And she said,
in class, this is in class.
Right there in class. Yeah. So nothing can really happen in now because cell phone calls are kind of loud. But if that's not bad enough, she's on the phone. She goes, okay. She hands the phone to the professor and says, Mom wants to talk to you. And of course, Mom wants to negotiate a B minus out of the C minus. I wish I could tell you that was an isolated experience. Happens hundreds of thousands of times every year. I talk to deans and profs. And then, of course, I talk to employers who are saying, I'm getting ghosted by my employees. Not ghosted on a text message. They'll start work and then just not show up. And again, I don't fault the kids. They were not raised to be ready for work. They were raised to be ready for school. And again, that's just not enough. So this book is really, we try to be research-based, but solution-biased. And we talk about how do we get them ready for the world that awaits them after graduation.
So that's perfect segue into the employer side. So now, we're hiring these really smart and talented folks right out of college. What are some things that we need to anticipate that they might need that maybe we wouldn't naturally think of? And how can we really set them up for success?
Okay. Well, here's what's cool. Gen Z has learned from the millennials. So they're smart consumers. They've grown up with digital media and smartphones, not just cell phones. So 35% of them plan to save retirement in their 20s. I mean, that's just crazy because I don't think the millennials were thinking about retirement and still aren't maybe. Salary is still the top motivator. Health insurance is a must for them. So that's a big issue in the election. 6 in 10 of them say I'd work weekends for higher pay or to make more money. So this is a shift from the millennial generation. If I were just to share a few tidbits to an employer on recruiting and managing and keeping Generation Z, I would share these sets of words. Just log these into your minds, listeners. First of all, openness and contact. They don't like flow charts. They like flat places. And even though you probably need a flow chart, I would say access to a boss is huge. 40% want daily interactions with their supervisor or their boss, and they feel they've done something wrong if they don't get that. 60% want multiple check-ins every day. So openness and contact. Number 2, fun and play. Now, I know some of you, when you hear those words, you're going, this is a workplace, not a playground. But they love to feel like we have gamified this job or this task that we've got going on. I don't know if Abby told you, Brandon, but we have a ping pong table and cornhole, and we give recess at our workplace. Nice. But we really want them to know the biggest game right now between 8:30 and 5 is to win at this thing called work. And they seem to embrace it. Speed and change. Their attention spans are 8 seconds. So good luck with that, teachers, employers. But here's what I would say. Even though they have an 8-second attention span, that only means they'll wait 8 seconds before getting diverted to something more engaging. They can be engaged for much longer. They'll binge watch Game of Thrones, for 3 hours. So we've got to be engaging with the work we have them doing and ownership of that work. That's one of the biggest pieces of data I put in the book, Brandon, is we have given them unwittingly an external locus of control rather than an internal locus. In other words, they think their boss is going to own it, their mama is going to own it, their teacher's going to own it. And we have fostered this growing reality. And I think we need to give them ownership and let them make mistakes and let them see, you can recover from those mistakes. A few more real quick. Fluid and adaptive. They love change, meaning and mission. Employers, think about how you can profile the job you're giving them in light of the strategy and the mission of your organization. Is it making the world better? And by the way, if it isn't, you might want to change jobs yourself. Every one of us ought to be doing something that makes the world better, but we need to communicate that. And then lastly, growth and learning. I believe Generation Z, based on the research we've looked at, they want to feel like they're growing and they're learning and becoming better versions of themselves all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas my generation said, I'm just going to, go to work and do the deal and get the watch at the end of my 40 years of the career. They want to be growing and changing. So some employers call this the gig economy. I'll do a gig here for 2.5 years, another gig here for a year, have a gig on the side over here. I might have 5 jobs in my 20s. And the reason they do that is they want to be growing and learning all the time. And if they don't get it on the single job they've got, they'll do another gig on the side. They'll drive for Uber,
Yeah.
So one employer, Brandon, you'll love this, said the corporate ladder has become the corporate lily pad. So if we want them to not hop so much, we need to provide a place where perhaps there is reverse mentoring going on. Reverse mentoring is actually a term that Jack Welch popularized in the 1990s. That's where he puts a seasoned veteran who's 58 years old, let's say, and teams them up with a 22-year-old new employee right out of college. But while the older veteran is pouring into the younger team member, obviously because they know how this workplace works, they're also listening and allowing that younger person to pour into them. How can we use the latest app that just came out to better market our company? Or how can you, what can you teach me? This gives mutual dignity to both generations. And I love what it does for a workplace. It just grows trust when we're both talking and listening. So I know I crammed a lot of information into that few minutes, but I just think this is going to be key, that we onboard them and say, now, can I listen to you and see if I can learn from you?
Yeah. So when I'm hearing you saying all that is, a lot of my listeners, if they're thinking about, okay, tactically, what does that look like? It almost sounds like you could boil it down to you schedule regular time with these folks and make sure you're asking them the question, what do you think?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Which is all about internal locus of control, agency, getting them to talk about what they're seeing, they're growing, they're learning, and they're mentoring, they're sharing everything that's in their head.
Yeah. And some of it's not worth anything, just like me, but I think we need to listen long enough to communicate we're valuing you. So let me do a quick story, if you don't mind. One of my favorite case studies on doing this well came from a great female leader named Angela Arendts. Angela is from Indiana, but she was asked to become the CEO of Burberry Coats in London years ago. Some of your listeners might know the name Burberry. It's a high-end trench coat.
Yeah.
It cost $2,000 to buy. But she was asked to come over to London to be the leader because the brand was on a decline. I mean, they were just not selling. It was for old people, that sort of thing. Well, listen to this. The first thing Angela did when she arrived in London, outside of get a place to live and meet her fellow executives, was she called a meeting to meet with the youngest, yes, I said youngest team members, including the interns. So she meets with these 20-somethings and she says, what do you think we need to do to turn this brand around? And they scribbled all kinds of ideas on a whiteboard and cards and so forth. But one of the ideas, just one example, was these young people, young employees, came up with an idea they called the art of the trench. The art of the trench. And here was the idea. They said, we need to put a special place on our website, Burberry, where people can post pictures of themselves in our coats. Well, now we all like to post pictures of ourselves, especially, the 20-somethings or whatever, which was the demographic they were trying to reach. So if you went to the site, I think it's still up now. I've gone to it a few months ago. There's pictures and pictures and pictures of customers that have gone to the site to post pictures of themselves and buy another coat. Well, the brand just jumped. And Angela, because she utilized both the old and the young, really turned the brand around. So here's the takeaway. She turned conventional wisdom on its ear. Usually when you want to bring about a change, you meet with your most seasoned veteran executives, come up with the ideas, and then tell the interns to do it. She met with the interns or the young people and said, we, the seasoned veterans, have the contacts, the budget, the network. We'll make it happen. And of course, it was everybody jumping in. but I love the fact that it was a counterintuitive idea that actually worked.
That's a beautiful story. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it?
Tim, you're an absolute gift. I'm so glad you were able to come on the show today. So before we start to wrap to close, I ask all my guests this question. If you had a kind of life hack for us on helping us to eliminate dysfunction in our life, what would be kind of that life hack, personal or professional?
Oh, wow. Brandon, this is a great question. My answer is kind of a macro answer. I've got a lot of little things, but I think if I were to speak to my younger self, 40 years ago, I think I would say focus on leading yourself. I was so much into leadership, which is a good thing, that I was looking outward on how can I influence these people? How can I inspire these people? How can I motivate? How can I correct these people? When really what I needed to do was look in the mirror and make some corrections on myself. So had I focused on really becoming a person that was worth following, I naturally get followers. I don't even have to have a badge on. So listeners, I don't know if this makes sense to you. Maybe you feel like, oh, I did that years ago, but if I, even at my age, will focus on becoming the best version of me every day, and that's all I look at, I don't have to worry about people being influenced by me. So Brandon, I think I would say that. And of course, that ties into personal disciplines, getting up, being fit, exercising, eating right. I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I've got to sleep and eat and exercise well all the time. But I just feel like that just makes me better, and I don't have to ask anybody to follow.
That's beautiful. I love that idea. I love that. So if people want to learn more about you, Growing Leaders, buy a copy of your book, Generation Z Unfiltered, where can they go?
Well, the simplest place to find me and our team is growingleaders.com, growingleaders.com. And there's a lot of free stuff there. I do a blog 3 times a week on leading the next generation well. You can subscribe to the blog if you want to. But you can also find the book. You can find the book there, but you can find it on generationzunfiltered.com. In fact, we match Amazon prices, and there's a whole bunch of free stuff, table cards to talk to a Gen Z member about. So anyway, you can go to generationzunfiltered.com to find the book there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Tim, thank you for coming on the show today. I really, really appreciate it.
Brandon, great to be with you.
Yeah, this was great. Hopefully we get a chance to do it again.
That would be fun.
Yeah, it would be. And thank you for listening and watching. Of course, continue the fight every single week as we take on kind of workplace dysfunction and make our lives that much healthier and better. And if you're not already listening to the show, why aren't you? Why don't you download and subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and all the other places where you can listen to podcasts, and rate and review the show so more people can find us. And if you want more additional resources, of course, go to theworkplacetherapist.com. So until our next show, have a great week and an awesome life.